Hey guys, so today we are going to, out of some soul scrap metal, we're going to build some spring compressors for a classic Mustang. So if you've ever messed with a shock towered front end, it really applies to, I think, some Mavericks, Cougars, Mustangs, but probably even more than that, more cars than you realize. But anyway, that old shock tower type front end, we're going to build a coil spring compressor to be able to compress those springs, and you're going to be able to do it out of scrap metal. If you've got a welder, you're going to be able to do it. You can buy these online. They're like $100 and something a piece, but I needed two of them because we're going to work on the stance of the born again Mustang so I can start getting the measurements so I can start getting the front wheels for the car. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be primo, and you're going to want to see it. All right, so before we jump into this video and I start showing you how to build these spring compressors, I'm going to bring a couple things to your attention. We have a illustrated parts list book. It's a guide complete with pictures, illustrations, insider tips, and everything for the 67 and 68 Mustang Coupe to Fastback conversion. I have a Coupe buying guide. If you're thinking about buying a Coupe to make a Fastback Mustang out of, I have that as well. I also have just released, this is the big news, just released, it has just been published, an illustrated guide for the parts for the 64 through 66 Mustang. If you've got a 64 through 66 model Mustang, or you want one, I've got the parts guide to take your Coupe and make it into a Fastback. And that parts guides, all those parts guides, the links for them will be in the description of this video. And so you can get them on a platform called Gumroad. It's got the link there. You click it, you go over there. Each one of the parts guides, the illustrated guides, are $10 for the download. But I promise you, you're going to more than save $10 at any point when you get ready to go into this endeavor. So for the 64 through 66 model Mustang, it will have the Dynacorn parts numbers. It's going to have the pictures of the part. That way you know what part you're looking at. And it's going to have all the information there, right there for you to download. It's going to be great. You're going to have it. People have been asking for this for a while. For those of you who are wanting to convert the 69 and 70 model Mustang, that parts guide is coming. Measurements for the 64 through 66 model Mustang, window opening measurements, which make all the difference when you're building a Fastback. Those will be available in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to upload those. And so, but anyway, if you're thinking about making a Fastback out of your Coupe 64 through 66 model Mustang, first generation Mustang, I've got the parts guide for you. The links for all of these will be in the description. Now let's jump into this video and let's build some spring compressors out of scrap metal for maybe 20 bucks, maybe less, maybe 10 bucks. And let's see if we can get the ride height on this born again Mustang where we want it so we can start measuring for wheels and tires for the front end of it.
Okay, guys, we're going to start off with getting some scrap metal. I don't know if you save scrap metal or not, but you need to. Metal's getting expensive. I'm going to pop that fender off this car because I've got to get to where the shock tower is. My fenders, unfortunately, are not attached very well because I haven't gotten that far. There's still a lot to do underneath there. So I'm going to build a template. Remember, this bracket that I'm building, or this compressor that I'm building, bolts into the spring perch where your shock mount, your bottom shock mount bracket will bolt in there. And so, you know, making stuff out of paper before you cut it out of metal is always a good idea. And so when you get ready to build something, build it out of paper and then make it out of some metal as well. So, man, the car's dirty. I've really spent a lot of time setting. It's been a lot longer process than what I thought it was going to be. So anyway, marking everything out. I've got to mark the holes as well. Once we get a good template, this thing's going to be easy as butter to cut out of metal. So as you guys can see, I'm kind of starting to do some voiceover stuff that helps me get more work done while I'm working on the car. And so I don't have to worry about anything but camera shots, and I don't have to necessarily do the interviews during the process. And I think that's really gonna help me. So you're probably noticing right now that I'm not using coilovers. I have a reason for that. I've made a video about it. There's your template. I just think it's a better deal, honestly, running regular coil springs. I think it's cheaper. Once you buy a cheap set of coilover shocks and put them on the front, they are adjustable. You wouldn't have to be doing some of the things that I'm doing. That is true. But eventually the shock in the coilover goes bad, and even on the good ones they go bad, just like a regular shock absorber, and you can't just replace the shock. For my car, I can go down to AutoZone or Napa or one of those places, and I can pick up a shock and stick it right back in the car, and I'm still rolling. So I'm building this car for an everyday driver. So as a daily, things like that matter. So anyway, I've transferred the information from the template to the metal. Now I'm going to cut it out. My favorite tool is the cutoff wheel. This is my Harbor Freight cutoff wheel. I like it a lot. I will tell you this, it will not work at all with the small batteries. So I bought a bigger battery. I think that's the 5 amp hour battery. So anyway, cutting away. Cutoff wheel does a good job. I buy a pile of these cutoff blades. Measuring everything out, making sure it's the same. I didn't realize these two pieces of metal are different thicknesses. Can you see that? This is a lot thicker. I'm not sure if that's going to make that much of a difference. I'm going to go with it. So this little bracket I built, it's just kind of a piece that fixture that holds stuff in place. It's pretty simple. Keeps you from hurting your fingers. Keeps things from spinning out of your hands, and it's real simple. Made out of old scrap 2x4. The bottom piece is a sacrificial piece, and just makes it a lot easier when you're drilling out small parts. These are Harbor Freight drill bits. I don't buy good drill bits. I've tried sharpening bits. Some of you can leave me some comments, maybe. If you got a good drill sharpener and you know where to get one, or you've sharpened bits and you've got a good technique for it, man, I'd love to hear it. I've tried several different things, and I just can never get them sharp again. It's a step bit. If you don't use a step bit, it's a blessed thing.
Okay.
So I'm here fitment, just trying to get these in there. Looks like everything fits really good. Once you do a paper template, it makes a big difference. It's not a complicated project, but these spring compressors really are going to make a difference. You can buy these online. I did find a resource for these, and so that's where I got the idea. Let me say this right quick. The spring compressor consists of a piece of, I'm using a long bolt. This is a piece of electrical bolt. It's like electrical equipment for power lines, but you could use all thread. And on the bottom side, it's going to have a regular piece of round pipe. So here I am pulling back out the old shocks. I left the brackets on the top of them when we disassembled the car. I found that if you leave more parts together, it's easier to keep up with them. So I'm pulling the shocks out, which actually were still pretty good. There was a lot of dampening still left in those shocks. I'm not going to reuse them, but I mean, they're there. But this spring compressor that we're building does use the top shock mount. And I'm going to use the bracket out of the top of that shock. You'll see in a minute is to make my template. There it is. That's actually pressed out of the very top of the shock itself. And I'm just kind of using that to index where the slots would be. I'm going to drill holes rather than slots for this top mount for the spring compressor. But again, another paper piece and another piece of scrap metal. Seriously, keeping up with scrap metal is an important thing. Y'all, I'm finding that metal has gotten so expensive that and especially if you got a dry place where it's not rusty and you have to do a bunch of work to it to use it. I've got a bunch of rusty metal too, but man, it's really nice not to have to do that. So I'm going to use my corded cutoff wheel for this one. It's got a little bit more horsepower, but I use both of them because sometimes I'll put like a flapper bit or a grinding bit in one and I'll have a cutting bit in the other. Cutting blade, should I say.
Grab that more than once.
Man alive.
I got a hole in my glove. Son of a gun. Look how red my little spot is. See, it's not near as bad as your glove don't have a hole in it. There it is. All right, I gotta make one more.
Now we're going to cut off the round pipe that's going to weld to the end of the all thread piece that's also going to mount to the bracket that bolts into the shock mount. So I've got to cut those off. Got a really old cutoff wheel. This old chop saw of mine has been around. It was my dad's, matter of fact. It's probably, no exaggeration, it's probably 30 years old. Still works. And it's just a, I don't know, Chicago, whatever, one of those, not an expensive one. So here's the pieces. Here's everything we're going to need, all the pieces, get those together. Now I'm clean up the parts. I will say this, the bolts that I was using, those electrical pole bolts, I used to have a bunch of them. I've pretty much used all of them for the past while. And so I don't have a lot of them left anymore. But almost out of gas. Do you see that? Yeah, that's the problem with where I'm at. Sometimes I run everything to the bare minimum. I don't know how much wire is left in there either. So both is a problem for me. Good old Harbor Freight Welding helmet. Well, let me say this about those bolts that I use. That bolt right there, the electrical power line bolts, they're galvanized. If you ever weld galvanized steel, you need to grind all the galvanized parts off of it. You're supposed to use a respirator when you grind it off too, but you never want to weld galvanized stuff. So I have, if you can see it's silver there, I've already ground all of that off. Just tack welding stuff together. Always tack weld it. This doesn't have to be perfectly straight. It doesn't really matter. There's some flexibility with the way that these compressors work. You'll notice I'll change gloves here in a minute. Cloth gloves just don't seem to work as well when you're welding. So I know some people are going to say, stop wearing those gloves. But I really need a resource of some really good, flexible, durable gloves for working metal. There it is. Full piece. I'm going to go ahead and weld them the rest of the way up. This is going to be welded all the way around. There's going to be quite a bit of pressure on these, so I took a little bit of time. This is done, and I sped this up, but I did take quite a bit of time making sure I got really good penetration and some good healthy welds on these brackets. Clean a spot. I'm trying to ground my table, so when I weld, I don't have to, and it didn't work. I mean, that did work there, but I did wind up clamping it to the piece eventually. A little more cleanup, tack weld, check for straightness, and then I come back in and I'm going to run a really good healthy bead, some good penetration around this piece. Again, this got quite a bit of pressure on it, so I want to make sure that it's pretty solid. There they are. So I have two of those. They're $120 a piece online, so I'd have $240 plus shipping. I built those for less than $10. It was scrap metal I had, so I had no money in it other than maybe a little bit of argon CO2 and welding wire. Cleaning up the the threads with the wire wheel. That wire wheel was my dad's. That grinding, the bench grinder was my dad's. That wire wheel is probably 30 years old. Can you believe that? So we're going to go ahead and slide them in and get them bolted up. And I've got to get the bottom pieces bolted in. I use carriage bolts, but that's all I had. And they only need to be finger tight. You don't have to really clamp them down. You're not leaving them in here. All I'm doing is I'm using this to pinch down these springs so that I can get a really good ride height for my car and start measuring for the wheels and tires that I'm going to buy for the front. I wanted to get it where it needed to be before I did that. And so these are going to get me to my right ride height. So just bolting them in. You can see the holes for my A-arms where I did the Shelby drop right there. You see that? Front A-arms are dropped down.
A lot of friction on this thread, so probably leaving them up a little bit is probably a good idea.
So that's kind of the ride height. They didn't look right with the front wheels and tires that are on there. I know it looks bad, but that's how it is. But it gives me a chance to kind of look at the height of it. I will point one thing out. If you look at that left leaf spring, I've got to straighten it on the bracket. It's pushed out a little bit. But I like the stance. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you like it or not. Again, these are not the front wheels and tires, but this is going to get my ride height down so I can start measuring, get back spacing. Let me know what you think.